Shalom. Welcome to Hayom. I'm Rabbi Arnold Rachlis. Our tradition says, Kol Yisrael arevim ze lazeh, all Jews are responsible for each other. And it's true. But is it also true that all Jews are responsible for finding each other? Our guest today thinks so. He has traveled the world over, Europe, the Orient, South America, looking for Jews and looking for non-Jews in all sorts of cultures to try to understand the values of different societies in which Jews live. Our guest today is Rabbi Joseph Tabachnik, who is the immediate past president of the Chicago Board of Rabbis, and a very good past president, I should say, as well as the spiritual leader of West Suburban Temple, Har Zion in River Forest, Illinois. Good to have you with us.
And good to be here with you.
Good. Let's talk about some of the places you've gone. Could you rattle off some of the countries you've been to in the last 25 years?
Well, actually, usually the stop is Israel. And around Israel, we go all over the world. It's possible for me to go to India, let's say, and then from India, we take the plane to Rome, and then from Rome to Israel. That's what my wife and I have been doing now for, I think it's the past 25 years.
Usually take a month off during the winter, which is a good idea when you live in Chicago.
Yeah, especially to get away from the hazards of Chicago winters. And we found it a stimulating experience because, as you've said in your introduction, at the high, Anochi Mevakesh, I'm looking for my brethren, and it's fun. It's fun finding Jewish communities in faraway places.
Well, let's talk about the place you've been most recently. You were in Nairobi. Yeah.
Nairobi. We visited Kenya, but particularly in Nairobi, and I was fascinated by Nairobi and Kenya and Jewish history connected with it.
We have some slides, and maybe while we show the slides, you could mention a little bit about your trip to Nairobi.
Well, we met some fascinating people. I received an introduction through the Consul General of Israel in Chicago, his counterpart in Nairobi, and he was gracious enough to invite us to dinner for Friday night. And we met a wonderful black family. The gentleman is very close to the state of Israel. And he began asking me about Heschel, Kaplan. These are great Jewish philosophers. And I said, how do you know? How do you know about them? So my host said, you ought to see his Judaic library. So he invited us to his home, and as you see in the slide, here is a magnificent Hebraic and Jewish library that he had, most of it in English translation. And on top of the shelf are Jewish symbolism. And I said to him, why are you interested in that? So he said, well, I'll tell you a story. He said, I became interested in religion. And the more I studied Judaism, the more I found out that it's so close to my tribal religion that I may as well become a Jew. Then he went on, and when I asked him what are the similarities between this tribal religion and Judaism, and he mentioned that one of the great principles that they have is one of the great ceremonies that they have is the ceremony of circumcision. And besides that, the president belongs to a small tribe where they don't mix milk and meat like Jews observe kosher. They don't mix dairy products, meat products. Then he said they have an oral history that they came from the Sudan, and an oppressor chased them out of the country and then chased after them. And they came to a body of water, and the body of water split in half, just like Moses, the great miracle at the Reed Sea.
So he's halfway there to being a Jew.
So he said, I may as well really learn something about Judaism. So I said, well, why don't you remain Christian the way you are now? So he said, Christianity is a great religion, but he said, remember that the British were here and they oppressed us. So he said, the choice that I really have is between the Islam faith and the Jewish faith, and the Jewish faith appeals to me more. So he's been in Israel now for 4 times, and he met the chief rabbi, and he's studying Judaism very seriously and really wants to convert.
If he converted and continued to live in Nairobi, would he be one of the few Jews there, or is there a Jewish community in Nairobi?
There is a Jewish community, but I think it would be the only black family who is Jewish. And I had the chutzpah, really, to ask him, well, wouldn't he feel out of place with his family being Jewish? He said, you don't understand Africa. We're all searching for religion. So that's why the Muslim faith has made such tremendous inroads in Africa. He said, I have a feeling if 20,000 people were given the right books in Nairobi, who knows what kind of a revolution it would be for Judaism. Well, I don't know if he's right or wrong, but it was one of the most fascinating evenings that we had.
It's heartwarming to go somewhere, to go to a whole other part of the world and find an appreciation for Judaism that you often don't even find at home in some ways. A rich intellectual appreciation. It
was an appreciation in depth also. You have a library as a rabbi, and I have a Hebraic library, and he would have nothing to be ashamed of. I don't know if you could see it in the slides, but the Jewish Encyclopedia is there, the Mishnah translated into English, the Midrashim, books on Zionism. This man is very serious, and by the way, the other people who are with him also spoke with glowing love about Judaism, and it was a very exciting moment. You know,
the Japanese, I know you've been to Japan, the Japanese have a sect, I don't remember the name, but I'm sure you do, a sect who are really very Zionist, and they support Israel, and they have a Beit Shalom, they have a peace house, a Shalom house there. Can you tell us about them, because I know you've been there.
We visited the Beit Shalom.
And we have a slide of that.
Yes, it's the 6th slide that I showed you. It's a marvelous place. Again, the leader of the Christian Zionists for the Christian Zionists had a vision prior to the establishment of the State of Israel. This is the story that he told me, that the State of Israel will be established in 1948. And he was in Manchuria, a minister in Manchuria. And at that time, in 1938, Japan was close to the Axis power. And to preach Zionism was dangerous. But in 1948, when the state was established, people began to take him seriously. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, at that time they thought he was really a prophet. And his love for Israel knows no bounds. The Beth Shalom house, and we stayed there, is a beautiful Japanese inn run by the church. And any Israeli or any rabbi from any part of the world could stay there for 2 days as their guests. And by the way, an Israeli breakfast is thrown in. And I had the great honor to speak at a church service, and the choir was just magnificent. There was an Israeli couple with us, and when they heard the choir sing Yerushalayim Meyal Pitgat Har HaTzofim from Mount Scopus, Shalom Lach Yerushalayim, it was really heartwarming.
Oh, sure. Tell us about the Jewish community in Japan. There is a synagogue in Tokyo.
May I interrupt
Sure.
you before the Jewish community, because this group of Bet Shalom does something else. They built a beautiful church dedicated to Anne Frank. Now, that church is so magnificent. You could see that in the 8th slide that I brought. Just a magnificent. You get a magnificent feeling when you walk in. I asked them, why did they choose Anne Frank? So the leader of the church said, how could you understand Zion and Israel, the state of Israel, if you don't know what preceded that, namely the Holocaust? And he said, if you take one little girl that was involved in the Holocaust, you could relate to it much more than a statistic of 6 million being killed.
Does the Jewish community interact with this group, or for meetings, for purposes of goodwill, for interfaith services? Or?
The Jewish community interacts with them, but the Jewish community is really not an indigenous community in Japan. These are businessmen or others who have come to Japan, and the actual Jewish community in Japan is very small, maybe 20 families.
Are they in there for a few years on business, or are there people who have been there 30 and 40 years? Or
I would say about 20 families were there 20 or 30 years, and the rest of the community, they come there for 2 years, 3 years. Some work in banks and international.
Did you ask them what it was
firm.
like to be so far from a large Jewish community? Most Jews in the United States live in large urban centers. They have a Jewish support community, synagogues and kosher butcher shops and Jewish community centers and everything else. To be a Jew in Tokyo is to be far away and cut off from all that.
Well, if you see the 4th slide that I brought, that beautiful synagogue that they have, and it's more than a synagogue. They even have a swimming pool and a tennis court. And Sunday, the whole Jewish community comes together just on a social basis. And of course, Saturday they have their own services. They even have a restaurant where Jewish-style food is brought in. So they keep together, but we must remember Japan's a very exciting place to be in.
What makes it so exciting?
Well, I don't know if they're Avis #2 to America or if they're Hertz #1. It's exciting because you feel the dynamism in the street.
But you also feel your apartness as a Jew. That is, you're not Oriental. This is
so it's not a Jew. You just feel apartness because you're not Oriental. It's a close.
Could you live in Tokyo? Someone who's lived in a large Jewish community like Chicago, could you live in Tokyo and be one of 20 Jewish families?
Well, it's more than 20 Jewish families. These are 20 Jewish families who are there on a permanent basis. I would say there are about 100 Jewish families if you count all the Jewish families that come from all over the world. No, for a few years, though, it would be very exciting. I would love.
Maybe you'll take a sabbatical and be the rabbi in Tokyo.
Well, maybe my board is listening.
You've also been to India, and I know that there are both the Cochin Jews and the Bnei Israel Jews.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about those groups?
Yeah, well, the Cochin Jews we didn't meet because they're in the southern part of India, and India is a huge country. So actually, we were there for a couple of weeks and we hit the highlights. But even in New Delhi, they have a beautiful synagogue, as you see in the 9th slide that I brought. Now, New Delhi has very few Jews, but the synagogue plays a very important role because the average person in India has never heard, let's say, of a rabbi. I always had to introduce myself as a Jewish priest. Except in one place, when I introduced myself as a Jewish priest, the young lady asked me, she says, "Oh, you're a rabbi." I said, "How do you know I'm a rabbi?" She says, "Well, I've read all of Isaac Bashevis Singer's works, and I have been reading in Hasidism." So even in a place like India, you find there's an interest in Judaism. And I think that a synagogue in New Delhi, a small little synagogue, plays that important role of being the bridge between East and West.
The Bnei Yisrael Jews of India, tell us what makes them distinct. And I understand a number of them now live in Israel.
Yeah. The Bnei Yisrael are a very, very unique group. They have a tradition of their own that they came to India with the exile, with the first exile in 586 BC, and they settled in India, and they didn't even realize, I mean, generations after that, they didn't even realize that they were Jews. But they kept many of the traditions that we know of. For example, on the Sabbath, they wouldn't work. They would fast on Yom Kippur. They would eat certain food on Passover. And when a visitor many years ago visited them, they realized that, and they wouldn't eat pork products, that they were Jews. And when the State of Israel was proclaimed in 1948, they took that as a messianic sign. And many of them left India and went to live in Israel.
Were they indistinguishable physically from the native population,
No.
or did they look like a combination of Jews and Indians?
No, they looked like Indians. To this very day, they look like Indians. But we have to remember, we do have a tradition of the 10 lost tribes. So just like the Falashas are black, and we don't ask, well, they're not Jews because they're white. I mean, they're Jews. The same way with the Indians. But they had a difficult time convincing the chief rabbinate that they were Jews.
Did they have to go through a conversion process in Israel, or did the chief rabbinate
they didn't
accept?
They didn't want to go through a
I'm sure they didn't want
process.
to. Did the rabbinate bend?
The rabbinate had to bend.
Yeah.
This was at the beginning of the state, and the rabbinate was forced to give in to public pressure. By the way, I met them in Dimona, which is in the southern part of Israel. And they're a marvelous group of people, a hard-working group of people who are integrating themselves into Israeli society. Then I also met them in India, and the ORT organization helps them out. This is a Jewish organization that trains these people for useful work. And I was in a school. It's you could see it in the 12th slide that I brought along. A marvelous school for little children, and then there's a school also for adults. Many of them become hairdressers, and then they go to Israel. This is a trade that is scarce in Israel, and they do very well.
What have you learned from your travels? I mean, you have been to countries that are radically different politically, culturally, religiously, in all sorts of ways. Values that are different, patterns that are different. What have you learned in your travels?
Well, first of all, I think it broadened my concept of Jewish life. I think I was much more parochial before I traveled than after having traveled with my wife throughout the world. The East European Jew is not the only Jew, nor is the American Jew the only Jew in the world. There are small Jewish communities that love Judaism with all, we could say, with all their heart, with all their might, with all their soul, that they will do anything to remain Jewish at a tremendous cost to themselves.
Have you adapted into your own religious life or to the religious life of your congregation any of the minhagim, any of the customs that you've seen in other parts of the world? Yes. For example, on Yom Kippur, we go out of our way to read some of the piyutim of the Sephardi community. The one that I like very much is the one before Ne'ilah, because I feel that it's very much part of Judaism. Also, recently I had a wedding of a Moroccan, rather a Yemenite young lady who married someone in my congregation. And I went out of my way to find out some of the customs that the Yemenites have and try to incorporate it in the ceremony. I think these people who are in these small Jewish communities and who maintain their tradition are to be admired. It's much easier being a Jew in America. I think in many ways, if we don't preserve their traditions, that is, if we don't discover them and incorporate them into our own liturgy, they're going to be lost.
Right.
Because those communities, many of those communities that you saw will be dying out. And unless they transport themselves and make aliyah to Israel, many of them are lost communities. But if we can somehow bring in those ideas and those piyutim, those prayers and those customs, there's a chance for something of that to survive.
And I also think that there are ways of helping them. For example, in the synagogue of Nairobi, they're most anxious to get prayer books and humashim. For example, I gave one of the gentlemen a conservative prayer book that I had. They never really knew that there was such a thing as conservative Judaism. So there's a cross-fertilization that goes on. We learn from them, but on the other hand, they learn from us as well.
Is the Judaism of all these countries something you would characterize as Orthodox? By Ashkenazic Orthodox standards, or is it more modern Orthodox?
No, I would say I wouldn't even categorize it as modern Orthodox. It's a different type of traditionalism. They're much more open than the Orthodox that we know in America.
Open to the general society.
Open to the general society, and they're not as rigid. Their ritual is Orthodox because they have a tremendous feeling of history. This is how their great-great-grandparents worship. They have more of a historic sense, let's say, than we have.
Do you think that if let's say, a Jew from Bombay came to your synagogue, would he look at it the same way you look at his synagogue as an interesting manifestation of Jewish life in the 20th century, or would he see it as too liberal or too American or not quaint at all, but very much apart from the tradition?
No, I don't think he would look upon it as very much apart. It certainly would be different, but I think there is enough of the liturgy to make him feel at home, that he would feel that he is part of us. For example, we were invited to homes of B'nai Israel people, and they wanted me to chant the Kiddush. They wanted to see what is the difference. And the difference that they found was only in the chant. The text was the same. So
has that renewed your feeling that maybe the liturgy shouldn't be changed significantly, so that Jews can go from synagogue to synagogue anywhere?
Absolutely. I think it is a mistake for us to change liturgy. I think what we ought to do is to reinterpret liturgy rather than change it. There was one time I felt very strongly we ought to change it. After all, this doesn't make sense in the modern world. However, if you look at liturgy as poetry, poetry doesn't have to be changed because it's true or false. Poetry has to evoke an emotion. And I think that a traditional prayer could do that very easily if we take the trouble to reinterpret the prayer in a study session.
If there are viewers watching who want to find Jewish spots in countries they're going to travel to, what advice would you give them? Are there books that you would suggest?
No books. What I would suggest is, number one, that they get away from their tours. And that they make it their business, particularly on Friday night and Sabbath, to search out a synagogue. And once they search out a synagogue and the people, the worshipers in the synagogue feel that they're sincere about looking for their brethren, I have a feeling that they will be accepted with open arms, and they will find experiences on the way.
I want to thank you for being here. You know, we could talk for a much longer time about the places you've been and the importance of those places in your life. I would like to say to those who are watching, do what Rabbi Tabachnik has done. Go visit foreign countries and sense that feeling of Klal Yisrael. Please join us again soon on Hayom.